Welcome MS Translators. We are here in Amsterdam in the Netherlands at the end of day 2 of the 2022 ECTRIMS Congress. We hope you enjoyed our day 1 summary. Once again, I am joined by Dr. Travis Stiles, CEO of Novoron Bioscience and valued MStranslate team member, and we're going to talk to you about what we've heard at the conference today. Travis, have you had a good day?
I have had a good day.
It's been a busy day.
It has been.
We are tired. Once again, just to let everyone know, we do apologize in advance if there is any background noise. We will try and minimize that as much as possible. We are almost literally the last ones in the conference venue, but we wanted to make sure that we could bring you this summary as soon as possible.
It's all for you.
But it does mean that people are trying to pack up things around us, and so there may be little noises along the way. So I might start talking about the session that I was in. So just actually to make people aware as to why we do it this way, if you're not quite sure how the conference works. Basically at ECTRIMS there are 9 sessions that are going on at any one time on different topics, and then there are multiple blocks of sessions throughout the day. Obviously that means that we're picking sessions that we want to go in that not only are we interested in, but we think that you are going to be interested in. And generally our philosophy around this is to divide and conquer so that we can give you as much as possible. What that means is that I'm in certain sessions, Travis is in other sessions, and then we come to you at the end of the day to bring you that information.
And we even have a guest star today with Dr. Alban.
We do. We have some special content that we're going to be releasing after the conference around, well, you were in it, I wasn't actually in that episode. What was that extra feature going to be talking about?
I think, I don't want to tell you yet, you're going to be upset. No, so Alban, we talked a little bit about Alban and his work, but Alban actually did some work for us. So there was a couple sessions that we weren't going to be able to get to because there's only 2 of us, and he was kind enough to agree to go and check them out for us and give us a little synopsis. Okay, perfect. So that's something to look forward to coming up as well. So the first session that I was in was talking about lifestyle factors. We know that lifestyle factors is a theme that our community is really interested in because we know that there is a constant desire to have an understanding about things that people can do in their daily life to help them manage their multiple sclerosis. Now there's 2 ways I think that you can look at what I'm going to talk about in that session. You can either take the glass half empty approach and saying we've heard all of this before, or you can take the glass half full approach of saying that maybe what this actually means is that we're starting to get a really good handle on the lifestyle factors that can be managed and how they can be used to improve quality of life and some symptomatic management in multiple sclerosis. So the 3 talks covered the key things that we've all heard about before in this area: exercise, diet, sleep, stress, and smoking. There we go. That was 5 things.
There were 5 things, but the last presentation talked about 3 things, so it was still only 3 presentations. In terms of what they covered, it was not a huge advance on what you might have heard before, but there were some little things that I think were important to mention. Exercise, I think there is now consensus that exercise for people living with multiple sclerosis does provide benefits. In terms of exactly the mechanisms by how that happens, it's still a little bit unclear, but there is certainly now quite significant amount of evidence to say it does provide benefits. And in fact, the National MS Society in the US have now provided guidelines for clinicians about what they should be recommending for people living with MS in the space of exercise based on all of the evidence that has been published to this date. I think one of the interesting points that came out of that topic was that we should start to think about exercise not as being a form of rehabilitation, but as a form of prehabilitation, which was the term used by the speaker. And that they were saying that what we should be trying to do is preserve capacity rather than just try and restore lost capacity. So getting in as early as possible with people and getting them on these exercise programs. In terms of diet, again, really the actual take-home message is that we're still not at a point where we know what is a superior diet for people living with multiple sclerosis. There is no one diet that at the moment evidence seems to suggest is the best one. Again, there is evidence to suggest that dietary modifications can have benefits, but it may not be a one-size-fits-all approach, and that different diets will benefit different people. Sleep, smoking, and stress. Again, it was things that we've heard before. Smoking is one of the biggest things that can be done to help not only prevent multiple sclerosis, we know it increases risk, but also we know that it increases or worsens disease progression. If you stop smoking at any time, you see the benefits. So it's not that it's ever too late for that. So that was the lifestyle factor session. Again, as I said, it's factors that we've heard a lot before, but I think people are continuing to really hone in on those to try and find the best ways that people living with multiple sclerosis can use them to get the benefits for them. So that was lifestyle factors. Travis, you weren't in that session. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the sessions that you were in today?
Oh, desperately so. As a trained exercise physiologist, I have to admit I was a little bit disappointed to hear that there wasn't a little bit more insight into some of the things that might work for MS patients. It is great to hear that the MS Societies now have specific guidances, but I think that at a conference like this, I really think that we're missing an opportunity to really hone in on the disease-specific interventions that would make sense. Like, is it a cardiovascular-based diet? Do we need to work in strength training? Does it matter based on age? I think that the lifestyle changes that we're talking about, like, we've been talking about these things for long enough now that I was really hoping that there was going to be a little bit more specific stuff. Although you did mention that mechanistically they are starting to tease out some of the detailed mechanisms, and that's actually very interesting because those could potentially lead to interventions down the line. So today, Alban and I have been talking, and you guys, I don't want to be redundant in the content, so I won't get too deep into it. But one of the themes that we've been really interested in is the remyelination theme. And today there wasn't a specific remyelination session, but there was some topics on the two things I saw was there was some cellular profiling. So basically trying to look at on an individual cell basis some of the differences between healthy controls and and people with varying forms of MS, and looking at within the lesion, outside of the lesion, what microglia, oligodendrocyte progenitors, and all sorts of what are the kind of metabolomic and proteomic differences between these different cell types. And I'll be honest, like, it was very basic science, and it was very different from most of the stuff we've seen here, but I actually really enjoyed it because it was, instead of being these really established, very popular names, it was a lot of graduate students, postdocs, early stage career scientists that were extremely excited about their work, and then you could tell that they had put a lot of strategy and thought into what they were doing, and they were very forthcoming with how early their studies were. So they would tell you, like, here's what I found and here's all the things it can mean, but I don't know what it means yet. And so it was a very honest and refreshing conversation, because you had these very young scientists kind of telling you the tip of the iceberg of what they're looking at, and there's all sorts of ways it could go, but I can't sit here and tell you what it all means yet, because we still have a lot of work to build on. But to me, there was two things that I got out of it. One, there's a lot of elegance and a lot, the single cell RNA-seq and RNA-seq pathway analysis and things like that is a tool that is increasingly becoming popular and extremely powerful. But how you use it is just important as if you use it. And the plan on what you do with that data next is even more important. I think a lot of times people leave it out because it's a very expensive technique. But it was really encouraging to see these young scientists coming up with these really elegant approaches. And then in the discussion afterwards, hearing their excitement, but also their honesty about, here is the limitations and here's all the things I want to do next. And I think that to me, that meant the future is very bright. On the other side, I was very interested in, there was like the gradient of pathology in CNS. Basically, you have like an interface that kind of like interacts with the CSF, and you'll get changes that will have a gradient of changes from where that interface is to deeper tissue. And I was very interested in that, primarily because I was very excited to hear about the difference between spinal cord tissue and cortex tissue and the brain tissue. Turns out that wasn't as much of an emphasis as I wanted it to be, because there's Novoron working on spinal cord injury, I know that pathology can be different and the fibrotic contributions can be different. So I was very excited to hear about that, but it ended up kind of shifting away from that and being a lot more about imaging. And the imaging component was super interesting because we saw the imaging presentation yesterday on what are kind of the imaging endpoints that could be used for remyelination clinical trials, and I came away from that like feeling like I'd learned some things, but feeling like there wasn't a lot of like forward-looking optimism. But then today we saw these things that were very kind of like experimental, and I felt much more optimistic because the way they were using these experimental endpoints was pretty impactful and there wasn't a lot of controversy or lack of consensus. People were very excited about it. I actually think that one of the things that really stuck in my mind, and man, I'll tell you guys, when you do 2 days of a conference like this, where we're literally here from 9 a.m. till 8 p.m., things start to blur together. But one of the things that really stuck in my mind is there was these pre-pathology changes that they saw in the choroid plexus. The choroid plexus is the membrane in your brain that basically makes CSF, the fluid that bathes your brain and provides nutrients. Because you get blood flow to your brain, but most neuronal tissue doesn't actually get direct interaction with plasma. And the pathological changes that they saw in the choroid plexus that preceded most symptomology was really kind of compelling, the data that they showed, and they were able to correlate MRI imaging to actual tissue pathology, which, the tissue pathology, being able to take sections of the tissue, put it on a slide, look at it under a microscope, is like the gold standard for looking at things, but you obviously can't do that to an alive person. So being able to go from imaging that you can do in a healthy, normal patient in real time, and then be able to correlate that to histology, and then correlate that to kind of like, what stage of disease it is, and be able to say this was pre-symptomatic, that I think that has a lot of promise for like an early intervention, and down the line, maybe even providing some promise for some early treatment, and also even maybe delaying disease onset kind of thing. So I was actually really excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what will be interesting is seeing what happens in 12 months' time. We're seeing a lot of stuff here coming out of the pandemic, and we don't know what impact that's had, and I think it's impressive that we're still seeing this amount of work coming together, considering how much has been impacted. But it will be interesting to see how a lot of that new stuff you're talking about comes together when we're together again in Milan in 2023. So just to finish off really quickly, the last session that I was in was on progressive MS. It was great to see that we had a session completely devoted to progressive MS, and there were two big takeaways of that session for me. One, I think that there's a clear consensus that we need to be thinking about how we conduct clinical trials to find new treatments that are effective in progressive MS, and using the strategies that we've used for clinical trials for relapsing or remitting MS isn't going to work. We need novel outcome measures, and we need to be thinking about how we're doing that, and I think that's really important, because I know that there is a lot of hope, but a lot of real desire in the progressive MS community for something to happen really quickly in this space, because we've got a cohort of people that, while we do have siponimod that is effective for secondary progressive MS, and we've seen ocrelizumab for primary progressive MS, there is still a real space here that needs to be filled in. So it's great to see that people are really thinking about the clinical trials in that area. And secondly, there was something around genetics in progressive MS, as we're really going to have some background noise coming through. I apologize, I hope you can hear me over the top of this. But some genetics in progressive MS that were looking specifically at genetic markers that didn't increase susceptibility, which we've heard a lot about before, but actually impacted on progression. And there was one in particular that they talked about where they found that if you had a certain variation of this gene, it impacted how quickly you progressed in people with this progressive MS, to a point where they looked at a disability marker, and if you had one version of this gene, you were likely to get there 4 years quicker than if you didn't have the version of this gene. Sorry, just as we have that little noise there. And so I think it's interesting now that we're starting to see these genetic factors playing a role in progressive MS as well. If you want to hear about either of the lifestyle factors or the progressive MS factors, or the conference in general, they were discussed in day 2 of the ECTRIMS podcast, where I sat down and talked to Tim Kutzi, who is the head of the National MS Society in the US, and he talked about his thoughts and shared his insights from day 2. As always, that podcast is available on all of your podcast streaming platforms, in particular Apple and Spotify, so make sure you do download that podcast and give it a listen. In particular, today's episode we think will be really interesting to people living with multiple sclerosis, so make sure that you do give that a listen, and if you have any feedback, please do comment below. So thank you for joining us, Travis. Thank you for sharing your insights again today at the end of a very long day.
Thank you to I want to thank the staff here. They're all trying to go home. They're being very kind and trying to keep it down. We want to appreciate them.
They are waiting for us to get finished. So thank you to them. We will be back with our day 3 summary tomorrow, finishing up the conference. As I said, if you have any questions, please do ask below. Otherwise, thank you for listening. Thank you.